I'm Lynn. Recently, I got married to my husband, Scott, and now I have a sister-in-law named Abigail, but I just got this weird call from her. Lynn, you listening? I am, but I didn't quite catch that. Okay, I'll say it again. Your cruiser? I crashed it into an iceberg. Yeah, still doesn't make sense. Needless to say, there's a lot to unpack here. First off, I don't own a cruiser. And what's this about an iceberg? You wouldn't see icebergs unless you're near the Arctic or Antarctic. We're in Los Angeles, so I doubt there's an iceberg nearby. But knowing Abigail, she probably doesn't realize that. She's a bit different in many ways. She's either confused about something or trying to tease me, one of the two. Thinking this, I asked Abigail again. Did you really crash into an iceberg? Yeah, I intentionally hit the iceberg and sank it. Abigail answered, laughing. Annoyed by her tone, I asked her a bit more sternly. Can you explain a bit more? Len, you're so silly. Fine, I'll explain. Abigail started her explanation, still laughing. Her story began when I visited Scott's family home. The reason for going to Scott's place was simple. We had a family meeting. Naturally, Abigail was there too. As soon as she saw me, she said, Wow, you look kinda Japanese. My grandma's Japanese. My grandma is Japanese, and my grandpa is American. Their daughter, my mom, married an American, my dad, and they had me and my brother. Later, when I was in upper elementary school, we moved to Birmingham, Alabama, due to my father's job. My appearance is a bit different from typical Americans, more East Asian, like Japanese. I've been teased about it a few times, so I was a bit on guard, thinking Abigail might do the same. But Abigail just said, Really? That's so cool. You're really cute. She complimented me like that. In a moment, I felt relieved. What if they hadn't accepted me? That's what I had been worrying about. Thank you. Looking forward to getting along. Sure thing. That's how I talked with Abigail, and then Victoria, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, joined the conversation. Len, you lived in Los Angeles, right? Do you still have a house there? The house we lived in is occupied by someone else now, but we do have relatives' homes there. Oh, I see. But as long as you have relatives' homes there, no need to worry. Victoria seemed oddly pleased. Then Abigail chimed in. That's what I was thinking too. I had a bad feeling about this, but an opportunity to travel with Victoria and her family isn't likely to come up often. So I didn't make much of it and let the conversation flow. However, Victoria and Abigail kept asking odd questions afterwards. About the kind of house I lived in Los Angeles, the kind of car I drove. Finally, they even asked about my relatives' homes in Los Angeles. I replied that I lived in a house with a pool and my uncle lives by a river. Hearing this, Victoria and her group laughed maliciously. That's when I realized they were planning to use my relatives to take a trip to the West Coast. Oh no. They're planning to take full advantage of me. But it's hard to complain to people you just met. And complaining might jeopardize their acceptance of the marriage. After much thought, I decided to bear it for now. After all, the chance to go to the West Coast wasn't immediate. By the time it came around, we'd probably be in a position to have a proper discussion. For the moment, I decided not to touch on the subject. Somehow I managed to get through the introductions. At the end, Abigail asked for my contact information, which I regretfully shared. That was a big mistake. After that, she started contacting me more frequently. At first, it was about once a week, so I just went along with it or declined casually. But gradually, she began to reach out more often. It became a hassle, and I started making convenient excuses like being at work or driving. Once Scott and I filed our marriage application, Abigail became completely unreserved. I tried to accommodate her a few times, but twice or thrice a week was just too much. And yet today she called again saying, Hey Lynn, want to hang out? It's already 8 p.m. I have work tomorrow. What? You can't make it work, right? No, I can't. Abigail finished high school and works part-time. She probably has more free time, but I'm a full-time employee. I work weekdays from Monday till evening, and my only days off are the weekends and the holidays. Now that I'm married, I have household responsibilities too. I just don't have the leisure to accommodate Abigail. Sorry, I have a meeting early tomorrow morning. Stingy, even though you're rich. With those words, the call ended. Since then, I haven't heard from Abigail. What's this about being rich? I work full-time, but it's not like I earn a high salary. I couldn't make sense of it. The next day, I got a call from Victoria. Len, want to go shopping together? I'm pretty busy with work, I replied nonchalantly. Then Victoria said something strange. You're rich, right, Len? I wanted to consult you about some brands I'm interested in. Wait, did I just hear something odd? Something about being rich? Wondering if I misheard, I asked Victoria to clarify. Sorry, did you just say something about being rich? Yes, I did. What about it? I'm not rich. What? But you lived in Los Angeles, right? Victoria said, as if it were the most natural thing. Does living in Los Angeles automatically make one rich? If that logic holds, does it mean all Los Angeles residents are wealthy? All these thoughts were swirling in my head. As I sighed, Victoria asked, What's wrong? Just a misunderstanding. I'm not rich. What? Even though you lived in a house with a pool? That's common in California. Oh, really? Yes. Sorry, I must have misunderstood. With those words, Victoria abruptly hung up. I was left puzzled. What was that all about? No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't find an answer. When I discussed this with Scott, he talked to Victoria and Abigail for me. According to Scott, here's what happened. Learning that I lived in Los Angeles, and specifically in a house with a pool, they assumed it must be in Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills means wealth, so they concluded I must be wealthy. Indeed, if one lives in Beverly Hills, it's not unreasonable to think they might be well off. But I just lived in Los Angeles, not Beverly Hills. So Victoria and her group's assumption were flawed. But they believed what they thought, hence the probing about my house. I did find it odd when they asked me those questions, but I couldn't lie. So I told the truth, which unfortunately fed their misconceptions. A house with a pool might be common in California, but it's almost unheard of here in Birmingham. It seems Victoria and her group misunderstood and thought I was wealthy. They probably thought being rich means they could benefit from my marriage. They could expect money gifts from me. Anyway, if I cozy up to them, something good might come of it. That seems to be what they were thinking. That's why they were contacting me so often. Eventually, Scott clarified the misunderstanding, but Victoria and her group seemed to grumble about it. Well, if I had been a rich girl, maybe we could have gone on trips or partied every night. I can understand their disappointment when all that became impossible. But still, it was good that the misunderstanding was cleared up. Sometime later, when I went to discuss the wedding plans with Victoria's family, if the misunderstanding had persisted, Victoria would have wanted a lavish wedding. But she actually said to me, "What kind of wedding are you planning? You're not going for something too extravagant, right?" "Yeah, I think a small family-only affair would be nice." "Right. You have to be mindful of expenses now." She seemed concerned, which was nice. However, Abigail still seemed to have her doubts about me. She didn't participate much in the wedding discussion, which was a bit disappointing. But even without Abigail's input, our wedding was still happening. A year later, we managed to have a lovely wedding. On the wedding day, my parents, who live in Birmingham, managed to make it in time for the ceremony. But my grandparents from Los Angeles couldn't come due to the difficulty of travel. Instead, my Uncle Taylor, my mother's brother, came. He said he would take pictures to show to my grandparents. As I was waiting in the dressing room a few hours before the ceremony, Taylor came to see me. Lynn, how are you doing? Taylor's company deals with boat rentals, handling cruisers and pleasure boats, popular among young Americans. He showed me a photo saying, "Look at this, I bought it." It was a cruiser in the photo, clearly expensive at a glance. How much? This much. Taylor typed a number on his phone. $3 million? What? It seemed he didn't catch what I said. Taylor has some hearing issues due to an accident in his youth, and speaking a bit louder helps him understand better. As I was marveling at how he could afford such a sum, Taylor showed me another photo. Lynn, this is a wedding present for you. For me? It was a picture of a pleasure boat. According to Taylor, his company had recently replaced some boats. He had kept one of them aside for me. It was currently at his riverside home, and I could use it when I visited. Thank you. While I was talking about this, Abigail entered the dressing room. What's this? What did you get? Abigail had a sly smile on her face. Seems like she was eavesdropping outside the dressing room. If I tell Abigail about the pleasure boat, she'll definitely insist on being taken for a ride, so I'd rather not tell her. But it seems she already overheard, so it might be hard to hide it. Reluctantly, I said, Taylor gave me a boat. A boat? Who just gives away a boat like that? It's a second-hand boat from Taylor's company. Instead of disposing of it, he gave it to me. Huh, interesting. Abigail didn't seem very interested. In a way, that was a relief. After Taylor left the room, I moved in front of the mirror to do my makeup. Glancing through my mirror, I noticed Abigail looking at the photo Taylor had brought. Maybe she's more interested than she lets on. As I was thinking this, Abigail had disappeared. Soon after, the wedding was over. On the way back in the car, Victoria said to me, Lynn, did you inform Grandma about your marriage? Of course I did. I even sent her photos of my wedding dress. That's good, but don't you think it would be better to visit her? As I was fearing this turn of events, Victoria continued. I'd like to greet your grandpa and grandma too, but they're in Los Angeles. That's why I was thinking, why don't we combine it with a family trip to the West Coast? It seems Victoria hadn't given up on the trip idea. It was a hard proposition to refuse. As I was thinking about how to decline, Victoria said, Actually, I talked to Taylor. What? With Taylor? Yes, and he said he'd love for us to visit. Did Taylor catch that in all the noise? Huh? That's something you overcome with willpower. I'm pretty sure Taylor didn't get it. So I refused, not wanting to inconvenience Taylor. Then Victoria frowned suddenly. Oh, poor Grandpa and Grandma. Couldn't attend the wedding, can't see their grandchild. Please don't say it like that. Don't you want to see them? I do, but... See, then let's go. In the end, I couldn't refuse. Pushed by Victoria, we decided to go to the West Coast for our honeymoon. But I wasn't unhappy about it. I would get to see Grandpa and Grandma after a long time, and we could play in the river near Taylor's house. There's also the pleasure boat, so it's sure to be fun. Might as well enjoy it to the fullest. With that mindset, I decided to go have a good time. A few months after the wedding, we used our summer vacation to travel to the West Coast. When I explained the situation to Taylor, he happily agreed to host us. So Scott, Victoria, Abigail, and I headed to Taylor's house in Los Angeles. Father-in-law couldn't join due to work commitments. Still, it was our first family trip since getting married. I wanted to use this opportunity to bond with Victoria and Abigail. That was my plan. The day we arrived was spent joyfully reuniting with Grandpa and Grandma and introducing Scott to them. I also introduced Victoria and Abigail, and we all enjoyed a family party. Abigail, with her inherent cheerfulness, quickly got along with Taylor's family. Victoria seemed to be having fun too, and we felt a step closer to being a real family. That's what I thought. The next day, my brother Kevin, who lives alone in San Francisco, came to visit late in the morning. Lynn. Kevin, how's school? For context, Kevin is a college student. It's the weekend, right? I'm off, so I came to say hello. I'll introduce you to Scott and the others. We talked, but I couldn't find Victoria and Abigail anywhere. Scott, who was helping my aunt, was there, but not Victoria and her group. Scott, where are Victoria and the others? I don't know. Scott shrugged. That's when I suddenly got a call from Abigail. Hello, Len? Abigail, where are you? My brother just arrived. Before I could finish, Abigail burst into laughter. You're so laid back, Len. What's going on, Abigail? Do you know where we are? I was just looking for you. Where are you? That's a secret. Just wanted to tell you something. Tell me what? Your cruiser. I deliberately crashed it into an iceberg and sank it. Abigail laughed loudly. That was the extent of what Abigail explained over the phone. So that's what happened. Got it? I understood the story, but what about my cruiser? Thinking it over, I remembered something. From the wedding day, Taylor had given me a pleasure boat. That time, Abigail was eavesdropping on our conversation. She saw the photo of the cruiser and heard me talking about getting a boat, so she might have been confused. Then I tried clarifying. You know, if it's my boat, it's at my house. The pleasure boat I received is at Taylor's house. I'm not sure of it since I glanced at it. No, it's different. Your cruiser sank right in front of me. It's hard to say, but I don't own a cruiser. What? There was a photo. You were talking about the boat being a gift. The boat I received was the pleasure boat. Pleasure what? Right, Abigail is a bit different. She wouldn't know the difference between a pleasure boat and a cruiser. A pleasure boat is for fun, and a cruiser is for staying overnight. What do you mean? It means the cruiser you're talking about sinking isn't mine. What? Whose cruiser is it then? That's what I wanted to know. But from her talk about the photo, it's probably Taylor's cruiser. As I was thinking this, I heard Taylor screaming over the phone, shouting things like, "What have you done?" and "What's going on?" Then I realized Abigail mistake it for my cruiser and had sunk Taylor's $3 million cruiser. Abigail, don't move. Why? What's wrong? This is Los Angeles, not some rural area like Alabama. Sinking a boat and running away is a big deal here. Really? Yes, police here deal with serious crimes. They're not like the sheriffs in Alabama. You understand? Oh, no! I could hear Abigail crying. She seemed to be pleading with Victoria nearby. Mom, help me! I don't know, Abigail. You did it on your own. Help me! I just wanted to be on the cruiser. It seemed like they were passing the blame to each other. Well, as long as they stay put, that's fine. I quickly contacted Scott and headed to the marina where Taylor's cruiser was. The marina was a few minutes' drive away. Arriving at the scene, several police officers were already there. I talked to a stunned Taylor. He told me this. Early in the morning, Abigail and Victoria had asked him to go on the cruiser, but their strong Alabama accent made their English hard to understand. Taylor thought that's what they wanted from their difficult-to-understand English. Meanwhile, I asked Abigail for her side of the story, and she said, I kept telling Taylor to let me on Len's cruiser. You actually said that? He didn't quite understand me. Well, I see. So I kept repeating Len's cruiser to Taylor. I think I get what she's trying to say, but I doubt that would get the message across. So I checked with Taylor about what he heard. He said, Lisa Cruiser. Now that I think about it, the pronunciation isn't too far off. And with Abigail's strong Alabama accent, it's not surprising it was misheard. But leasing implies long-term rental. Normally, one would refuse such a request. But Taylor had realized last night that Abigail was a bit unusual. She kept repeating, Lisa Cruiser. Taylor, out of kindness, thought she wanted to borrow a cruiser. As a result, he let Abigail onto his own cruiser, and she misunderstood it as mine. That seems to be what happened. But why did you want to sink my cruiser? I thought you lied about not being rich, getting cruisers and stuff. She thought I was actually rich enough to receive a cruiser, but was hiding it. Abigail wanted to get back at me for lying. Even if it was out of jealousy or feeling lied to, sinking a cruiser is too extreme. But I still had questions, so I asked her, "How did you manage to operate the cruiser? You don't have a boating license, do you?" "I just kind of figured it out by watching Taylor." "So you guessed?" "Yeah, I fiddled around and it started moving. And then I couldn't stop it, crashed into the dock, and it started sinking. So I thought I might as well sink it." According to Abigail, her plan was just to cause a little trouble, but the cruiser moved more easily than expected and hit the dock. It then started sinking, and she panicked. But her coming to me with this was infuriating. Yet, if left alone, it would become a huge problem, and she didn't think to call the police in her panic. How could she convey this situation to me and give me a scare? Abigail thought of this. There was a movie about a ship sinking after hitting an iceberg. She figured she could use that as a reference, saying it hit an iceberg would surely cause panic. Besides, that movie was a Hollywood film. Hollywood is in Los Angeles, so they couldn't have filmed it without nearby icebergs. Therefore, she assumed there must be icebergs nearby. With this bizarre and whimsical reasoning, Abigail lied about hitting an iceberg and sinking. Moreover, she thought if she said such a thing, I would be worried about her safety. Then she expected me to rush over in a panic. Seeing my panicked state would be enough revenge for her. I understood why she lied about hitting an iceberg, but her reasoning was ludicrously flawed. Afterwards, both Abigail and Victoria got a scolding from Scott. Fortunately, there was no damage to other boats, so paying for the repairs settled the matter. "And after all that, why do I have to work for a river cleaning company?" Abigail cried in Birmingham. "It's obvious. The repair costs were substantial." "But there are other jobs." "Well, you wanted to be on a boat, right? This river cleaning company lets you do just that." "I wanted to be on a cruiser, not just any boat." In the end, Abigail was left crying while working for the river cleaning company, picking up trash from the boat. It was tough work, but ideal for her who wanted to be on a boat. For me, there was a slight upside. Actually, Victoria started working too, for Abigail's sake. This meant she stopped contacting me as much. Of course, I want to get along with them. But for now, it's important they work and earn money, especially for Taylor's sake. Otherwise, I'd be in trouble. After all, I haven't even been on that $3 million cruiser yet.
On my way home from work, my cell phone rang. When I answered the call, it was the police, telling me that my husband had been injured in a fire. My husband said he had a meeting with someone from work today. A fire while he was out? Surely it's not our home. Thinking this, I hurried home to find our house safe and sound. Feeling relieved, I had no time to relax. I asked my friend to watch my kids while I headed to the hospital. When I entered my husband's hospital room, he was asleep. Although I had heard he suffered from a fire, his burns didn't look severe. The room had 2 beds, and the other bed had its curtain closed. According to the doctor, my husband had some burns, but they should heal in a few weeks. The more serious issue was a broken spine from jumping out of a 3rd-floor window to escape the fire, which might leave lingering effects. On my way back to the room after the doctor's explanation, a nurse apologized for placing my husband in a room with a female patient. When I asked who the woman was, I was told that she was also a victim of the same fire, and they were brought to the hospital together. Where did the fire happen? Well, it's work-related, so I can't tell you. Just go home and bring me a change of clothes. Why should I? What do you mean, why? It's normal for a wife to take care of her hospitalized husband's needs. I don't know about that. You always ignore me and the kids when we're sick, so don't expect me to take care of you. That's a ridiculous excuse. While my husband was talking, the door to the hospital room opened. Someone I knew entered, and I was a little confused as the curtain to the other bed was opened. Seeing the person lying in the bed, I was speechless. My name is Amy. I have a family of 4 with my husband and our 2 sons, ages 3 and 5. I'm currently 30 years old and have been working at the company I joined when I was 22. My husband used to work at an IT company but quit about a year ago. The reason, he said, was to adopt a more modern way of working. My husband quit his job without consulting me, which led to an argument, but he wouldn't listen, insisting that freelancing will bring in more money. When I criticized him for not discussing it with the family, rather than worrying about the income, all he would say was, "Don't worry, our income will increase." After quitting, my husband started freelancing from home. At first, things seemed to go well, but he gradually began to slack off. He wouldn't get up until noon and seemed to spend the late nights playing games in his office. Whenever I asked when he was working, he always said, "I have a duty of confidentiality, so I can't discuss my work with you, even as my family," and never gave me a straight answer. Initially, his income was $2,000 a month, but has steadily decreased, and for the past 6 months, it has only been about $500 a month. I wouldn't have minded if he helped with housework with his low income, but despite being home all the time, he didn't do any housework or childcare. Not only did he never help with chores, but when the kids caught a cold, he'd say, "I can't afford to catch it too," and would leave home for a few days. When I got sick, I asked my husband to take care of our son because I was going to the hospital, but he would say, "Why don't you just take the kids and go to the hospital?" And he locked himself in his workroom. With no income, no help with housework or childcare, and not even showing concern for his family, my husband was becoming unbearable. I thought about getting a divorce since it seemed the burden was only on me, and he didn't appear to be a good father to our sons. However, I was so busy every day that I could only make slow progress on preparing for the divorce, and I spent my days feeling frustrated. During that time, my husband, who rarely left home, began to go out more often, claiming he had errands to run, and started keeping his cell phone with him at all times. I quickly noticed the changes in my husband and suspected him of having an affair. In the past, I might have been shocked by my husband's infidelity, but this time I secretly celebrated in my heart that I could use this to my advantage in getting a divorce. I tried to gather evidence of the affair to get a divorce on the grounds of my husband's fault, but it was difficult to obtain evidence from his cell phone since he never let it out of sight, so I gave up. I considered hiring a private investigator to take photographic evidence, but we were living on almost solely my income, so I had hardly any savings. Every day I worried about how to catch my husband in his infidelity, and I could feel the stress building up. That's when a turning point came for me. After work, as I was heading home, my cell phone rang. When I answered the call, it was the police, telling me that my husband had been injured in a fire. My husband said he had a meeting with someone from work today. A fire away from home? It couldn't be our house, right? I rushed home with these thoughts in mind and found that my house was safe. Although I was relieved, there was no time to relax. I hurriedly went to pick up my sons and called my friend. I asked my friend if she could watch the kids because my husband had been taken to the hospital in an ambulance, and after dropping my sons off at her house, I headed to the hospital. When I entered my husband's hospital room, he was asleep. I had heard about the fire, but his burns didn't seem too severe. The room had 2 beds, and the curtain was drawn around the other bed. As I was standing there in a daze, a nurse came in and told me there would be an explanation from the attending physician, so I left the room. The doctor said that although my husband had some burns, they would heal in a few weeks. What was worse was the broken bones. My husband had jumped from the 3rd floor to escape the fire, and the impact had fractured his spine with the possibility of residual effects. When I was told that there might be residual effects, the first thing that came to mind was that I should have divorced him quickly. I think I'm an insensitive person, but I couldn't even imagine taking care of my husband. As the explanation from the attending physician ended and I was on my way back to the room, the nurse apologized that my husband was sharing a room with a woman. When I asked who the woman was, I was told that she was someone who had been in the same fire as my husband and had been brought in together. Could it be that this woman was my husband's affair partner? I thought as I returned to the room and found my husband awake. Where did the fire happen? Well, I can't tell you because it's work-related. Seeing my husband hesitate, I became convinced that he had been with his affair partner when the fire happened. Anyway, go home and bring me some clothes. Huh? Why? Why? You're my wife. It's obvious you should take care of your hospitalized husband. Huh? I don't know about that. You ignore us when the kids or I are sick, so don't expect me to take care of you. That's a ridiculous excuse. As my husband was talking, the door to the room opened. It was Mr. Smith, the husband of my friend. Feeling a little confused to see someone I knew, Mr. Smith bowed to us and opened the curtain to the bed next to us. As the curtain opened, I saw my friend Mrs. Smith lying in the bed. I looked at my husband in surprise, and his face turned pale as he avoided my gaze. Ah, I see. It became clear that my husband's affair partner was Mrs. Smith, and I was too dumbfounded to speak. Mrs. Smith was a close friend among my friends, and she had even brought her child to our house to play. I had introduced Mrs. Smith to my husband at the time, so he should have known that she was my friend. I had told Mrs. Smith about my husband's recent coldness and my suspicion of his affair. I wondered what Mrs. Smith's intentions were when she listened to my story with a serious face, agreeing with me by saying, "I see." Was she trying to find out how much I knew about the affair? Suppressing my urge to confront my husband and Mrs. Smith immediately, I greeted Mr. Smith. "You're Mr. Smith, right? Your wife has always been a great help to me."
"Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit flustered."
"I heard your wife and my husband were in the same fire. He won't tell me where it happened. Do you know anything about it?" When I asked, Mr. Smith glanced briefly at my husband.
"I'm sorry that your husband was also caught in the fire. The fire occurred at my house."
"It happened at your house? I didn't know my husband was visiting you." When I looked back at my husband, he was hiding under the covers. Excuse me, I have something I'd like to talk about. Do you have time?"
"Yes, I have time."
I had a pretty good idea of what Smith was going to talk about. We moved to a nearby diner where Smith told me that he had suspected his wife of cheating for several months and was gathering evidence. He had once looked at his wife's phone and found a photo of her looking cozy with another man in her photo album. So now he had hired a private investigator to take indisputable photos of the affair. I told him that I had also suspected my husband of cheating for a while, but didn't know who the other person was. When I said I intended to divorce my husband, Smith agreed to help me, and we discussed our plans for the future. 2 days later, Mr. Smith and I went to the hospital together, and my husband and Mrs. Smith were still sharing a room. When my husband and Mrs. Smith saw us enter, their faces tightened. "I'm glad you both seem well. I came to your room the day before yesterday, but you were resting, so I couldn't talk to you. Are your injuries okay?" Yeah. I fractured my shoulder, so I need to rest for a while." "That's tough. You'll need money now, so I hope you recover quickly." "Well, our child is still young, too." "That's right. You'll have to pay child support, so you'd better heal up and start looking for a job." Mrs. Smith seemed confused and didn't understand what I was talking about.
"Hey, stop rambling. You brought my clothes, right?"
"I didn't bring them."
"You're useless."
"I told you before that I wouldn't take care of you anymore. What I brought you today isn't a change of clothes, it's this." As I said this, I took the divorce papers out of my bag and shoved them in front of my husband.
"Huh? Divorce papers? Are you planning to dump me because I might have lingering injuries?"
"It's not because of your injuries. You said you had a business meeting the day you were taken to the hospital, right? So why were you at Mrs. Smith's house?"
Well, I didn't tell you, but Mrs. Smith is a business associate. We were discussing work at her house when the fire happened."
"Did you think that excuse would work? It's obvious that I know about your affair with Mrs. Smith. No matter how much you try to deceive and make excuses, it just looks ridiculous." As I said that, my husband's face turned sour and he defiantly retorted,
"Stop nagging about a little affair. Don't make such a fuss over a single affair. What will you do after the divorce? Can you raise our 2 kids on your own?"
"Of course I can. I've been raising them on my own all this time. You've never taken care of the kids, have you?"
"I've played with them."
"It's only about an hour once every few months. The neighborhood fathers play with their kids' fathers more than you do."
"Well, then it'll be tough with just one income. We've been living on 2 incomes up until now. Do you want our child to live in the hardship?"
"It'll be fine. In fact, without your expenses, our lives might even be easier."
"But I'm injured."
"So?"
"If people find out you left a husband who needs rehab, your reputation will suffer. It'd be better to divorce me after I'm fully recovered."
"Because you are not someone who can stick to things for long. It's clear that you will give up on rehabilitation midway through. I can't wait until you fully recover. You have your lover to take care of, don't you?" Upon hearing this, the husband glanced at Mrs. Smith and seemed to reluctantly accept the situation.
"If you insist, I understand. I don't need you anymore. A bastard who serves divorce papers to an injured person. I'll divorce you. Now hand over the divorce papers."
As he reached out to grab the divorce papers, I kept them out of reach. "No way."
"What are you talking about? You want a divorce, right?"
"We haven't discussed alimony or child support yet."
"You're trying to take money from an injured person? I need money for hospital bills and rehab."
Oh, right. You better hurry up with rehab and start earning money to pay alimony. You don't have any savings, do you? Huh? No savings? Mrs. Smith reacted with surprise to my words. My husband gave me a serious look and glared at me. You said you had 4 digits in savings. You said freelancing was profitable.
I meant I have enough income to easily save 4 digits. I'm just spending it as soon as it comes in now, but I can save up money quickly.
My husband desperately tried to make excuses. Although his current income was hardly $500 a month, I kept quiet because I didn't want to start a fight over it. Since they agreed to the divorce, I explained the future plans to my husband and Mrs. Smith. I told them that we had chosen a lawyer to consult about the compensation for the affair and that we would receive a certified mail from the lawyer later. Then we left the hospital room. As I returned home, I started preparing to move. While my husband was hospitalized, I went to thank the friend who took care of our children the day my husband was taken to the emergency room, bringing her a box of chocolates. I told my friend that my husband was fine, as he had been taken to the emergency room after the fire at Mrs. Smith's house, but was not in life-threatening condition. Moreover, the mom friend offered to take care of our children if things got difficult, so I also told her that I planned to divorce and move because of my husband's infidelity. Although I didn't directly mention that Mrs. Smith was my husband's affair partner, my friend seemed to understand. Of course, I intentionally made it obvious to my friend, but there were a few people who knew about my husband's involvement at Mrs. Smith's house fire, so the rumor would have spread even without me saying anything. Later, as we planned, I asked a lawyer to proceed with a divorce, but we couldn't easily decide on the compensation and child support amounts. At first, my husband boasted,
I'm a freelancer, so I can work from bed even if I'm injured. I plan to work all day because I'm free. I might even make over $100,000 a year. I won't take you back even if I become rich.
I had hoped that my husband's arrogance would make him pay the compensation and child support, but his hope of making $100,000 a year was shattered sooner than expected, and he started being reluctant to pay. He went from asking for an extension on the payment deadline to requesting a reduction in the amount, and eventually called me directly to plead.
Come on, $20,000 in compensation is too much. My infidelity is partly because you ignored me saying you were busy. Isn't $5,000 more reasonable? It's not that I can't make money. The clients who used to hire me stopped because I didn't meet the deadline once. It was just a few days late, so it's not my fault. I can't pay the compensation. If you really want the money, talk to those clients who stopped hiring me.
I've told you many times, talk to the lawyer about the compensation. I said just that and hung up the phone. After that, I asked the lawyer to tell my husband that we would go through mediation if the negotiations dragged on and my husband easily accepted our terms. From there, everything went smoothly, and we received a lump sum payment for compensation and child support, finalizing the divorce. The Smith couple also divorced, and the husband gained custody of the children. The Smith family has 3 children, but it was revealed that during the affair, the wife left the 10-year-old eldest son to take care of the 2 younger siblings while she went out. After my son and I moved close to my parents' home, I heard from a friend that my husband and Mrs. Smith got remarried. The 2 of them are still living in the house where the fire occurred. My husband walks with a cane, and Mrs. Smith always has messy hair and a gloomy expression, making them look like an elderly couple even though they're still in their 30s. My husband has accumulated over $100,000 in debt due to alimony and child support payments, and Mrs. Smith, who is a stay-at-home mom, is being asked to pay child support for all 3 children, so together they must have quite a lot of debt. But I don't feel sorry for them since I significantly reduced the amount I claimed from my husband on the condition of a lump sum payment. My husband always blames others for his misfortunes, so I'm sure he's still doing that now. I felt refreshed after finally getting away from him. However, I feel guilty for making my 2 sons suddenly separate from their father and friends. At first, they were both bewildered in the unfamiliar place, but now they have become friends with the neighborhood kids and are having fun. On weekends, my parents come to visit and play with my sons, allowing me to have some time to myself. Since my husband left, I now have more time, money, and peace of mind. Thanks to the extra resources, I can give even more love and attention to my sons than before.